I'd like to welcome you here today to glorious sunny Birmingham. Thank you all for making the effort to come. And we were dubious that we'd run out of chairs, but we have, so we're quite pleased by that. And I'd like to thank Chiltern Railways for providing this facility for us today. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Keith Rose, the Chairman of the Railway Mission.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm just going to briefly explain what we're going to do today, and I will add my welcome to that of Andrew. Thank you very much for coming. As you know, this year is 130 years since the Railway Mission was sort of officially formed. I have a copy of the original document at home, which Ian gave me, and there were, I think, 7 signatures, and they had as their profession. They had the name and the date and their profession. Their profession generally was gentleman. So I'm not quite sure we're up to that, but okay. So we're here to celebrate really 130 years of the Railway Mission, working with rail staff throughout England, Scotland, and Wales, and sharing really the gospel of Christ. That's what motivates us. And so today we just want to mark that occasion, so that's what we're going to do. We're not going to sing, so don't worry. Okay, we did discuss it and decided, well, it's a bit difficult sometimes. It's not always people are into singing. So if I just briefly explain what we're going to do, we're going to start with just a short prayer in it, which will be by Stephen Sorby, who's our chaplain in the northeast, or one of our chaplains in the northeast. Then Chris Gibb from Virgin Trains has very kindly offered to give a railway perspective of what from the railway side they see the value. I did say to him, "It's going to be good, is it?" And he said, "Yeah." So, and then we're going to have a short Bible reading, and then we're very pleased to welcome Reverend Dr. John Nichols, who's the Chief Executive of London City Mission, who's going to talk to us from the Scriptures briefly, and then we'll close. And we should be finished by before 1 o'clock. There's then, as you will see behind you, there's a light buffet lunch, and you're all welcome to stay for that. We'd be delighted just to have the opportunity to chat a little bit with you. And then, all I have to remember before Dick does something else, obviously we have some items for sale, things that we've got next year's calendar already. The Railway Mission calendar has just been published, so that's there, 2012. Get your own, be early. We've actually produced some Christmas cards, which are there as well if you like, and various other items which are there. But we'd like to talk to you as much as possible. And then later, at around 2 o'clock, for those that can stay, what we intend to do is have perhaps about an hour where we'll share in more detail some of the work of the mission. I'm going to do a bit of a PowerPoint presentation, but I'll talk to it mainly about where we are and what's going on, some of the sort of organisation and the finances of the mission, and then Liam will be interviewing a couple of the chaplains, and that's meant to be interactive. We're not here to talk at you. We're here to answer questions as well. Well, we might be able to answer them anyway. We'll do our best. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Thank you for coming again and welcome, and I'll hand over to Steve and ask you. Let's just pray together.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for bringing us all safely here today, and for the opportunity to thank you for 130 years of the Railway Mission, for the work that's been done before and the work that continues today and will continue for the future. We thank you for the supporters who sustain us and encourage us. We thank you for the railway staff and all that they mean to us as chaplains, and all that we mean to them as well. We just thank you for the many, many blessings that you've given us over 130 years. We hope and pray that you will continue to sustain us, continue to encourage, revitalise and empower us in the work that we do, pastoral and spiritual. In the name of Jesus.
Well, as I said a couple of minutes ago, I'd just like to introduce Chris Gibb. Chris is the Chief Operating Officer of Virgin Trains, and he'll tell us what he thinks of us. Thank you, Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Birmingham. Welcome to the Midlands. For those of you who've travelled from far-flung places, I recognise visitors from as far away as Hull, so there we are, managed to get Hull mentioned straight away. I can't promise to mention everybody's home in what I'm going to say, but I thought I'd get Hull in there first of all. Of course, we're in the wrong station in Birmingham. I think the London North Western Railway would be mortified if they could see me speaking here, but not quite as much as Adrian Shooter. He's not here, is he? In fact, a couple of weeks ago, this room was used for Chiltern to launch their fantastic new train service to London, and I couldn't help but pass through the station while they were doing their PR event, and I took over a table out there with a nice cup of coffee and entertained some of Chiltern's guests and journalists, and Adrian told one of the local newspapers about it, and it described me tiptoeing around the station. Bless him, because it was a great compliment, but as you can see me, I'm not exactly the sort of bloke that tiptoes around in my size 11 Dr. Martens, so I'm here today and I'm definitely not tiptoeing around. We're here at a fantastic moment in the railway's history. If you look back over 130 years of the railway mission, where we are right now really is a fantastic period in railway history. I appreciate that it's easy to forget that on occasions, but right now we're carrying more passengers across the railway industry than any time since 1927. And when you consider that Dr. Beeching closed over a third of the network in the 1960s, it is quite remarkable how many people we're carrying. And indeed, just in the few minutes before I was speaking, I saw several brand new London Midland, there we are, I've got another plug-in, brand new London Midland trains passing through the station. There's probably a newish Chiltern one. So we're having a fantastic time on the railway. In my own business, we've grown the passenger numbers from 14 million a year to 30 million a year. So it's a great place to be. I've been on the railway just over 30 years myself, and in the first few years I think I was made redundant and displaced 4 times, and I really couldn't see myself here 32 years later looking back on my career and my involvement in the railway industry. It just did not look like a long-term job prospect at that time. But it's fabulous to be in such a growth industry. And in fact, if you ask most senior railway people in the industry right now, the biggest problem we have is accommodating all the passengers. Where are we going to put them? How do we deal with the overcrowding? How do we make the stations bigger? How do we make the trains longer? All that kind of thing. Often in this infrastructure that is 130 or more years old. So it's a great time to be in the railway industry. There's a plug for the calendar, great picture on the front. I guess that's the closest a Virgin train will ever get to this station. So make sure you pick up one of those as a memento of coming to Moor Street today. I think when one thinks of the railway mission in a job like mine, you think of a big crisis, and I can see a few people in this room who've been involved in the major railway accidents of the last 10 or 15 years, which have really sort of put a bit of a dark cloud over the recent history of the railway, and the role that the railway mission plays in those kind of events. It's not a sort of backup service that you only call on when you're in a big crisis like that, though. But I do know many people across the railway who have been involved in the railway mission at the time of a major accident, and how the railway mission came forward to support individual people at the time of the accident, and in many cases for a long period afterwards. So yes, I have reason to be thankful for the involvement of the railway mission in all of those things. But of course it's not just a major crisis on that sort of scale that the railway mission comes to the fore. Many people, as mentioned in this little leaflet, have other personal crises that for them are just as important, and it lists here the things that the railway mission gets involved in: marriage breakdown, domestic upheaval, serious illness, bereavement, alcohol and drug dependency, all these things that the railway mission gets involved in. And very often, as it also says here, working closely with our own welfare teams to help people through those kind of crises. For For some people, talking to a chaplain can be a great thing for them. It can be a change in their life, in the way that they lead their life. For other people, the chaplain is just somebody who's going to listen and support them and provide some moral authority. I think the railway chaplains do a great job in spanning the divide of people that are very religious, that are not at all religious, that are of different religions. The railway mission chaplains do a great job in meeting all those people in the railway family. And it's interesting today, just looking around at the different badges that everybody's wearing. I saw somewhere a cross-country badge earlier on one of the chaplains, and I can see a London Midland badge over there. And that's very indicative of the sort of trust that we have in the railway mission, that we're all willing to allow the chaplains to wear our badges and identify with our companies. I suspect some of the chaplains have got several badges, which people like me can't possibly have. But that's a great testament to the trust that we have in the railway mission. Of course, part of the role of the railway mission is preaching the word of Christ to the wider community in the railway industry. That was one of the guiding lights as to why the railway mission was set up. And different people who are Christians live their life in different ways. Some like to extol the virtues of Christianity, others like to live their life in a Christian way. Personally, I like to do my job in a Christian way. Each day I will consider how I do it in a Christian way. And I do participate in a church most Sundays. I'm very active in a local village church. And I like to think that I can set an example. I have a privileged job. I'm very fortunate with the role that I have, that I can set an example to young people, old people, other people in the community as a Christian, and I'm very proud of being able to do that. Going back to some of the things that the railway mission has done over the years, I've got a slightly strange diary today because I've got somebody coming to see me this afternoon who wants to talk about the Harrow disaster. Now, whether he thinks I'm in my 70s and I've got a vivid memory of it, I don't know, but the Harrow disaster happened in 1951 and 112 people died in that tragic accident, and I believe they never found the real reason as to why the accident occurred in the first place. And this chap wants to come and talk to me about the history of the accident. So you can tell I've read up about it, so I'm not completely ignorant around it. But that was the last major accident. I believe 112 people died in that accident. That was the last major accident of that kind of scale. I mean, it's unthinkable today to think of 112 people dying in an accident. The trains in those days were made of wood. One train crashed into another and a third one was involved. It was in the middle of the rush hour. There was a fire. It was an absolutely horrendous accident, the kind of which, you know, people in my job and some of you in the room here, occasionally you think, when is this going to happen next? Will I be involved? Will I be in the firing line? You know, it's close enough to our kind of role to do that. And I just know that at any time I can turn to the chaplains in this room for some help, either with the passengers or the staff, or for me personally. So I'd like to thank very much everybody involved in the railway mission for the fantastic work you do on behalf of all of the industry, and for all the people in the railway industry here who obviously support the railway mission by being here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, one other role that probably you don't know a lot about, but does happen, is obviously we have to run the railway mission. We're a charity, we're also a company, we're an incorporated charity. We have to have trustees, and to do the reading today I've asked Ray Wingate. Now Ray actually, amongst the trustees, I'm whispering this, he's not a railwayman. But actually Ray's been a trustee longer than anyone else. He's the longest serving trustee on our board, and he actually attends a church in Brighton, which is one of the old railway mission churches, and that's partly how the linkage comes. So as a representative for the trustees, I'll ask Ray just to come and read the scriptures. Thank you, Ray.
Yes, thank you. We've just celebrated our 135th, so. Colossians chapter 4, I shall be reading from the English Standard Version. Masters, treat your slaves justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I, Paul, am in prison, that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. May God bless his word.
Thank you, Ray. Hopefully you can understand from that reading the aptness of that to us as the Rowan Mission. Some of the trustees we're thinking, oh no, not Colossians 4 again. But just there that for the chaplains, we're here to share the word of Christ, but they have to be gracious and act wisely and just be all those things. And as chairman of the Railway Mission, I think, I sometimes wake up and think, that we've got 130 years of history, and as Chris Gibb has just said, we do a lot of very positive things in the railway industry, and it all depends on the chaplains. They're such a vital part, and their manner and their person and what they are. And I kind of think it'd be so easy to throw 130 years down the drain in one day if we do the wrong thing. So that's why I read that passage. That's our prayer, that we would continue to be to speak well, to live well, and to reflect Christ. Okay, and I think as many of you may be aware, that we're the Railway Mission, and if we look at the banners, this one says Railway Mission, that one says National Rail Chaplaincy Service, because I think some of you will be aware that obviously not all the railway chaplains are Railway Mission railway chaplains, particularly in the London and South East area. Several of them, or quite a few of them, are from London City Mission, and we've launched, as it were, the NRCS, National Rail Chaplaincy Service. So that's really the brand, if you want to call it that, with which we face railway staff. So whether it's a London City Mission chaplain or a Railway Mission chaplain, it doesn't really matter. It's the National Rail Chaplaincy Service. So we work in partnership with London City Mission, and so that's why I'm very pleased today to be able to welcome Reverend Dr. John Nichols, who's the Chief Executive of London City Mission, to come and talk to us. So John, we look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. If you'll forgive me a personal note, I too have some qualms with our venue today. I'm the black sheep of a long-standing railway family. My great-grandfather, from my great-grandfather who did shunting with a horse at Guildford Junction, to my daughter who, until she left having children, was on the Thameslink, managing on the Thameslink project. Even my grandson is showing a healthy interest in the railways. I'm the one generation that's missed out on the railways. And what my grandfather would have said, me being in a Great Western station like this, well, I do know what he would have said, but I won't tell you. It's a great pleasure to be here. And it's a great privilege for the London City Mission to be part of the team under Liam's leadership in the National Rail Chaplaincy Service. I know some of our guys are hoping to come up today, but they weren't able to do that in the end. Some of them are members of the chaplaincy team were very busily involved last week with the Gideons. Perhaps some of you were involved with Gideons too. Gideons had a big blitz on London last week, preparatory for the Olympics. The aim was to get 60,000 Bibles, not just into hotels, but into key places like police stations and railway stations. And several of our chaplains were able to take members of the Gideons round, and were thrilled with the ready acceptance that they found from rail staff for Bibles. So thank God for the Gideons, and thank God for the National Rail Chaplaincy.
to read you a few verses in Mark chapter 10 and then base our thoughts on those today. Mark chapter 10 and from verse 42. So Jesus called them, the disciples, and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it's not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Well, I want to speak to you for these few minutes today on the secret of running a good service. That seems appropriate for the railway mission. We're concerned to run a good service, and perhaps one of the vital things in having a good service is that you make good connections. If your connections let you down, then, well, it's not a good service. And the thing I want to just point to you today is the connection between the two parts of that reading I've just given you. There's Jesus' conversation with the disciples following the bust up about James and John wanting to be the greatest. And then there's the story of Bartimaeus. They're right next to each other in the gospel, but I think all too often we cut the Bible up into little self-contained bits, and we don't see the connection between them. It seems to me that the story of what happened with Jesus and Bartimaeus is, certainly in Mark's eyes, a living example, an acting out in reality of the principle that Jesus has spelt out in the preceding verses. And that is that Christian ministry is a very special sort of service. So, first of all, let's look at the service that is announced. Jesus said to them, it's not to be like that among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. The railway mission has a great calling, no greater calling than to work for Jesus Christ and the gospel in this world. We've been hearing, I was going to mention, remind you of the needs that the railway mission chaplains address. There are, of course, the major pressures, if you like, the railway pressures, the pressures of stress in the workplace, those, thankfully, less common ones of accidents and major disasters. There's a constant stress for many of being at the receiving end of passengers' impatience and frustration when things go wrong. For many who work in the railway industry, there's that feeling. The railway industry, sometimes it feels like you're working for a job, and that's not easy, that way on. But we've been reminded too that there are the personal pressures that staff are under, and of course in between there are the individual tragedies that strike so many on the railways, the deaths on the line, and the awful reality of that. And these days there's also the constant underlying nagging pressure of the security question. The underground staff who have got somewhere in their memory banks those pictures of the tube trains after 7/7. And while they're maybe not thinking of it in the front of their minds every moment, it's there in the background. And it's a pressure, it's a stress. We are ministering, we are serving an industry that needs a good service. And Jesus makes this basic contrast in verses 42 to 45 here. He says, look, when other people do their business, when other people build their organisation, they tend to do it by trampling on everybody else. They've got their agenda. They've got their goals. They've got their targets. And woe betide the person who gets in the way of somebody who is looking to build their business, to build their empire. It will not be like that with you. You are to be personal servants. That's really what the word means here. You're not to judge people in how can you use them to further your ambitions. You're rather to say, how can I help them to meet their needs, their deepest longings. It is a life of service, not seizing for ourselves, not looking out for ourselves, but ministering to others, ministering to people as individuals. That's the sense. I'm sure I don't need to amplify that. But then we see that service demonstrated in Jesus' encounter with Bartimaeus. And one of the things that we see here immediately is exactly that contrast. You see, here's Jesus, the great man, this amazing preacher from Nazareth, this miracle worker, this holy one. And he's surrounded by the various circles of his disciples, the close-knit group of the 12, the others, the 70, and crowds of other people. And they're eager to hear every word that drops from his lips. They're fascinated by everything that he's doing. Some of them are aware that things are headed to a crisis up in Jerusalem and where they're going. And they're anxious and they're concerned. How's that going to affect them? Some of them, we've been reminded with James and John, have got personal ambitions all wrapped up in there. And when a voice is heard, a rather strident voice from a wretched beggar lying by the streets, Jesus, have mercy on me. Half the crowd instinctively and immediately turn around and say, shh, be quiet. We're listening to the Master. We're doing something much more important than you. You wouldn't understand any of this. Keep out of our way. Don't get in the way. He has nothing to offer. They discount this blind beggar. He's got no potential. He's negligible. Indeed, so many people just walk past and no longer even see beggars lying on the street. But Jesus is not like that. Jesus doesn't evaluate Bartimaeus and say, can he add anything to my support? Can he contribute anything to my plans? Jesus hears him. By the way, even psychologically, that's amazing. Because Jesus, better than anyone among that crowd, knew what lay ahead of him in Jerusalem. He knew, he'd been telling the disciples that he must go up to Jerusalem, be betrayed, be arrested, be scourged, be crucified. And if there was anybody in the world that you and I would have excused for not hearing Bartimaeus that day, it would have been Jesus. Of course, his mind was on this awful weight that he was already beginning to bear. The awful reality that he knew was coming to a climax. You'd have understood. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear you. My mind was on other things. But Jesus Christ heard him. Jesus Christ was different. He wasn't making the assessment of that man in the same way that even his followers were. He was serving Bartimaeus. And Jesus engages with that person with respect. Jesus doesn't patronize, oh yes, blind beggar, let me give you some money, or oh yes, I'll heal you. Jesus talks to him. He actually probes him. If you think about it, it's a very profound question in the circumstances. What do you want me to do for you? Suppose you met somebody begging on the street in Birmingham today, and they said, spare any change, guy. And if you said to them, what do you want me to do for you? Well, you'd hope they might say, well, could you spare 10p? But suppose they said to you, well, could you get me a job? And I'd like a house to live in, and also I've lost the use of one of my arms to work with. Could you make that better for me? You'd say, I'm ever so sorry. I can't do those things. But Jesus asked that remarkable question, which actually is really a way of saying to Bartimaeus, who do you really think I am? Who do you really think I am? You called me the Son of David. You called me a very reverential, power-implying name. Do you really mean it? And Bartimaeus asks a crazy question. You see, it's a bit like, you can ask for one thing. Well, is he going to play safe and say, well, 10 quid would be nice. That'd set me up with meals for a week. If I use my one request on something that he can't give, then I've wasted it. But he says, Lord, I want to see. Bartimaeus wasn't just touched by Jesus and then forgotten. He was given a new place, in a new community, with a new purpose. That's what Jesus means by not lording it over people, not exploiting people for what they can do for us or for our organisation, but serving them individually. And that, of course, is a picture of the ministry that we try to run in our chaplaincy ministry. That's what the Railway Mission chaplains are trying to do. They're there for people. They take notice of people. Whether it's the Chief Operating Officer of Virgin's Trains, or whether it's the lady who works overnight in the carriage depots cleaning the coaches. The chaplain has time for them all. And that's chaplaincy, noticing people, going to people. So, have you made that connection between life of service and the nitty-gritty of meeting the Bartimaeuses of this world? Pray that the Railway Missions chaplains will continue to exemplify, to practice this personal, self-denying, patient service, that they will provide a good service in the footsteps of Jesus. Pray that the Railway Mission will be able to convey this to the rail companies. It's interesting, we live in days people say, well, what are the benefits? What are the outcomes of your ministry? And this is something that is foolishness in many ways. The world operates on the, well, we know how to build a business, we know how to deal with ruthless competition and all that. But this idea of self-denying service doesn't fit in. It's hard to make a business case for it. And we need to pray for the leadership of the mission as they deal with the railway companies, to be able to show them, to have some good examples of Bartimaeus, some testimonies from people within the rail industry that will convince the leaders that this is good value, this is a good service. And then lastly, if you're here as supporters of the Railway Mission, have confidence in this ministry. Don't look Don't measure it by instant results and numbers. Measure it by its faithfulness to the teaching and the pattern and the command of Jesus Christ. It's a ministry worth supporting. It's a ministry worth paying for, and a ministry worth praying for. And praying that the railway mission may go on running a good service for many, many more years beyond this 130th year. Keith briefed me. He didn't tell me whether finishing within 5 minutes of my time would count as a long time. God bless you, Keith, and all the team.